If you could find this treasure, you would be a billionaire. But that's a big if.
I get an awful lot of stories coming to us after 30 years in the business, and probably about 80 or 90% of them you have to chalk up to some fictional writer as writing a book or magazine, but this one has a ring of authenticity to it, and therefore it deserves attention, and we intend to give it.
And that's why I think it's going to be found with technology. It's not going to be found with dumb luck, because I've spent all of that.
Leon Trabuco is the one most famously attributed to this story, but he was not the only one involved. He and several of his companions had gotten together and decided they would buy up as much gold as they could. They would then have it melted down into ingots to be smuggled into the US. Then, all they would have to do is wait for the price of gold to increase, and they would have easily doubled their money. However, they ran into a bit of trouble, and their misfortune could be someone else's find of a lifetime.
Like in the great stories, Mr. Fertile. The ones that really mattered. Folk in those stories had lots of chances of turning back, only they didn't. They kept going.
Before we get into the heart of the story, just a quick note. This is a reworked version of the original video. The audio has been cleaned up and I've added even more research, context, and detail to give you a fuller, more polished look at everything that happened. So let's pretend you actually wanted to go out and find this incredible treasure hoard. First, we need to understand the man, the reason, and the plan he and his companions used to try to pull this off. So maybe, just maybe, you can start looking for it yourself. In the summer of 1933, deep in the lush highlands of Cuernavaca, Mexico, a secret meeting took place, one that would spark the most tantalizing treasure legends in North America. The man who called the meeting was Professor Morrada, no ordinary academic. Morrada sat on the Economics Council of the University of Mexico. For those of you that don't know, it's got a strong reputation, especially for students interested in public policy, development, and more alternative or real-world focused economic theories. It's not your typical US-style economics program, but that's actually part of what makes it stand out. So this guy, he understood markets, he understood risk, and above all, he understood timing. 4 years earlier, in 1929, the United States was rocked by the worst financial disaster in its history. The stock market crash that triggered the Great Depression. Banks collapsed. Millions lost their jobs. Businesses folded overnight. People stood in lines for food while Wall Street millionaires became paupers. But while most saw despair, a few saw an opportunity. Professor Morrada assembled 4 powerful and extremely wealthy men, each with resources, ambition, and just enough ruthlessness to gamble on the future. Leon Trabuco, a mining tycoon and rancher from Chihuahua, Mexico. Ricardo Ortega, a land baron from Torreon. Carlos Sepulveda, another rancher from the north with deep regional influence, and Rafael Ortega, a high-level international banker with ties to both Spain and Mexico. These were not just businessmen. They were power players, men with enough capital to shift the tides of fortune if they made the right move. And that move, they believed, was gold. As America's economy crumbled and its currency weakened, they saw a simple, brutal truth. If they could acquire gold, massive amounts of it, while prices were low, they could sell it back to the United States for a staggering profit when the market rebounded. But that plan would require secrecy, patience, and a place to hide more gold than most people will ever see in their lifetime. What came next was one of the boldest, most mysterious gold smuggling operations of the 20th century. If you had about 5 of these, this would equal about maybe half a gram of gold. In today's value, it's worth around $40 to $50. But in 1933, you could buy 50 of them for just 20 bucks. And that's essentially the logic behind their plan. Together, Trabuco and his partners amassed 16 tons, that's 32,000 pounds of pure gold at the fixed 1933 price of $20.67 per troy ounce. That's valued at nearly $10.6 million in Depression-era dollars. Today, that same stash would be worth well over $1.2 billion. Acquiring that much gold wasn't as simple as walking into a bank. It required an underground network of buyers, connections with miners, and a lot of discretion. Professor Morrada leveraged his political and academic ties to quietly tap into private gold sources across Mexico, especially in the resource-rich states of Chihuahua and Durango. Much of the gold was acquired from informal mining operations, which allowed for off-the-books purchases. Some of it may have even come from stolen or misreported shipments. To disguise their activities, the group spread purchases across multiple regions and used intermediaries and aliases to avoid detection. Buying gold jewelry was likely part of the cover, as wealthy men. It wasn't suspicious for Ricardo Carlos Orlean to be seen purchasing expensive jewelry. It drew far less attention than large bullion transactions would have. So they bought rings, bracelets, necklaces, anything with a high gold content. All that gold had to be processed, so they built their own secret smelter, completely off the record and likely located on private land, far from prying eyes. Some say it was in Pueblo, Mexico, but that remains unverified for now. But it's believed workers were likely paid in cash and sworn to secrecy. Everything smelted was cast into plain, unmarked gold bars. No mint stamps, no engravings, no serial numbers. The goal was complete anonymity. If one of these bars was found, it would reveal nothing about its origin or its owners. Each man had a role. Morrada was the architect. He predicted the economy would recover and the gold price would surge. He believed Roosevelt's suspension of the gold standard would eventually result in a dramatic revaluation, and in 1934, he was proven right. Gold jumped to $35 an ounce almost overnight, a 70% increase. Leon Trabuco was the financial backbone. He contributed 12 of the 16 tons, as well as mining resources and transport support. Ricardo Ortega and Carlos Sepulveda served as financiers and logisticians. They supplied funds and facilitated transports and housing for the operation. Rafael Ortega used his status as an international banker to acquire gold through private miners and perhaps through his European connections as well. From beginning to end, the operation was secret, deliberate, and highly illegal. Mexican law forbade the export of gold. U.S. law had just been changed to make importing or hoarding gold a federal crime unless licensed by the Treasury. They were violating the laws of both nations. With 16 tons of gold ready to go, the group faced their biggest obstacle yet, getting it into the United States. Mexico had strict laws that made it illegal to export gold, especially in bulk, and the U.S., they didn't exactly welcome smuggled treasure either. Federal law made it a crime to import undeclared gold, particularly during an economic crisis. But Professor Morrada had a plan, a dangerous, daring plan. He allegedly contacted a crop-dusting pilot from Utah, a man with a modified aircraft and nerves of steel. This pilot flew a 440 horsepower plane fitted with extended fuel tanks and stripped down weight for maximum range. It wasn't built for cargo, but it was fast, light, and perfect for quiet cross-border runs. The pilot didn't use an airstrip. He would land and take off from makeshift dirt runways in the northern Mexican desert, far from prying eyes. At the time, radar coverage was non-existent across much of the American Southwest. Air traffic control, practically unheard of outside major cities. It was the perfect era for a smuggling operation. Some say the pilot's real name was William C. Elliott. Others insist he only gave an alias, the Red Moisier. An odd name, but oddly fitting. In old slang, a moisier was someone you couldn't trust, someone who might double-cross you when the stakes were highest. But trust him, they did. Leon Trabuco supposedly met the Red Moisier face-to-face, possibly in northern Mexico or across the border in New Mexico. Once paid and briefed, the pilot began flying the gold, load by load, into the United States. Each flight had to be perfectly timed. No storms, no patrols. Just quiet skies and a long stretch of desert to drop into. Over time, all 16 tons of gold were ferried into New Mexico, likely landing in remote parts of the desert, under cover of darkness. And we wouldn't even know this part of the story if it weren't for a man named Ed Foster. Foster has been chasing this legend for over 35 years. He claims he uncovered old documents, aviation logs, and even first-hand accounts that point to a specific area of the New Mexico desert. According to him, the gold was buried, and it's still there, waiting to be found. 16 flights, 16 tons of gold. Once the last shipment arrived in New Mexico, the group faced a harsh new reality. They couldn't sell a single ounce of it. Why? Because in April of 1933, President Franklin D. Roosevelt signed Executive Order 6102. This order made it illegal for American citizens to own or hoard significant amounts of gold or bullion or coins. Anyone holding more than a small amount was required to turn it over to the government under threat of heavy fines or even imprisonment. And just a year later, in 1934, the Gold Reserve Act went even further. It gave the federal government full control over all monetary gold and fixed the price of gold at $35 an ounce, up from the previous $20.67. This change had massive consequences. Professor Morrada's prediction had come true. The value of gold skyrocketed almost overnight, but it didn't matter, because their gold, smuggled, undocumented, and hidden from both governments, was now worthless in the legal world. To sell it would mean exposing the entire operation. To keep it, hiding a fortune that no one could spend. So they made a choice. They buried it. According to the legend, the gold was transported deep into the New Mexico desert. They chose a remote flat basin surrounded by mesas and canyons, isolated, dry, and perfect for concealment. A few miles off any major road. No towns nearby, no witnesses. They dug deep pits, loaded the gold in, and covered everything with dirt and rocks. Some believe they even planted brush to disguise the disturbed ground. Only a few trusted men knew the exact location. And they may have drawn crude maps or created markers, but if they did, those clues are long lost. And then, one by one, the men began to die. Rafael Ortega, the international banker, died suddenly in his Mexico City office in 1939. Some say it was a heart attack. Others whisper about poison. Carlos Sepulveda, the rancher from Chihuahua, died in a violent car crash near Monterrey in 1940. No one ever explained why his car veered off the road. The mysterious pilot, possibly William C. Elliott or the Red Moser, is said to have joined the U.S. Army Air Forces during World War II. He was reportedly shot down over Germany in 1944. His body was never recovered. Ricardo Ortega and Professor Guzman Morrada also died. When and how? No one really knows. Their deaths faded quietly into history. By the end of the 1940s, only one man remained. Leon Trabuco, the one who personally funded the majority of the gold, the one who now carried the full weight of the secret, and that secret may have been too heavy to bear. By the 1950s, Leon Trabuco was a changed man. He sold off his ranches, liquidated his mining interests, slowly backed out of the public eye, and then quietly, he left Mexico altogether. Leon relocated to Spain, perhaps to distance himself from the heat of U.S. investigations, or perhaps because, by then, he had lost everything that tied him to the treasure. We'll never know for sure. But what we do know is this. Trabuco lived out the final years of his life in Madrid, wealthy and reclusive. In 1962, he made a brief and mysterious return to Mexico City. The visit lasted only a few days. He met privately with his lawyer, possibly to settle affairs, or maybe to pass along final instructions about the gold. And then, just as quietly as he came, he left. Trabuco returned to Spain, where he died a few years later in 1975, at the age of 86. After his death, rumors began to swirl. Some claimed he had drawn a map and left it with his lawyer. Others said he confessed everything on his deathbed, but no one could decipher the location. And then there's the theory that Leon gave the location of the treasure to his family, but that they were too afraid to ever retrieve it, fearing legal consequences. One persistent rumor says that shortly after his death, officials from the U.S. Treasury Department and the Department of Justice contacted his lawyer in Mexico City. What they discussed or what they were looking for was never revealed. No arrests were made, no gold was found, at least not officially, and so the mystery remains. 16 tons of smuggled gold worth $1.2 billion today, allegedly buried somewhere in the wide remote desert of New Mexico. Some believe it's hidden near Ship Rock. Others point to the arid mesas outside Farmington. A few even claim it lies beneath a private ranch, camouflaged by time and dust. Treasure hunters have searched for decades using everything from aerial photography to ground-penetrating radar. Some swear they've come close, finding strange soil disturbances, or metal readings too large to be natural. But no one has ever found the gold. Maybe it's still out there, waiting. Maybe it was dug up long ago and quietly melted down. Or maybe, just maybe, the desert still guards its greatest secret. Leon Trabuco never told anyone exactly where the gold was buried, but according to legend, he did leave behind one cryptic hint. We'll come back to that though. Let's return to the man who spent most of his life chasing the legend, Ed Foster. Foster wasn't just a weekend treasure hunter, he was obsessed. He pored over government documents, chased down old rumors, interviewed locals, and followed every lead he could find. And one day, he struck something interesting. Ed interviewed an elderly Ute woman who had grown up on a remote reservation in northwestern New Mexico. When she was just a girl around the time of the Great Depression, she witnessed something strange. A small plane had landed on a flat mesa near her home, not once, not twice, but repeatedly over many weeks. Each time it came, it brought something, cargo, she assumed, and around the plane were Mexican men, a lot of them. That stuck in her memory, because at that time on a Ute reservation in the 1930s, no one, absolutely no one, ever saw Mexican nationals out there. It was isolated, foreigners stood out. But for a brief moment, something secret was happening in that quiet desert. Foster made note of the mesa's location. Then, while exploring a ridge about 20 miles east, he found something even stranger, a house. Not an abandoned shack or a trailer, a full-size plaster and stucco home, complete with windows, a tile roof, and front and back doors. Totally unlike the traditional Ute homes of the time, which were far more rustic, and far too modern for a reservation with no history of architecture like that. It looked, as Foster described, like something ripped out of Tijuana and dropped in the New Mexico desert. The house was weathered, long abandoned, and sinking slowly into the earth, but its very presence was an anomaly. Who built it? Why was it here? And more importantly, who was staying there in 1933? But the strangest discovery was yet to come. While exploring a canyon near the mesa, Foster stumbled upon a flat-faced rock, half buried in scrub and dust. At first glance, it looked natural, but etched deep into the surface were 5 unmistakable characters. 1933, 16 ton. No initials, no names, just a date and a number that matched exactly the amount of gold Trabuco and his associates had stockpiled and smuggled into the US. 16 tons. If this was real, it wasn't just a clue, it was a marker, maybe a boundary stone, maybe a warning, or maybe a silent confirmation that the gold had in fact been hidden nearby. Ed Foster became convinced this was the resting place, and he dedicated 35 years of his life to combing the area, hoping to unearth the lost treasure. He died in 2003, still believing that one day someone would find it. Others have picked up where he left off. To this day, metal detectorists, amateur archaeologists, and gold hunters hike into the mesas near Shiprock, Farmington, and the Four Corners region, hoping to catch a glint of something beneath the sand. The terrain is harsh, the summers are brutal, and the land is vast, over 20,000 square miles of high desert and rocky outcroppings, any one of which could be hiding the motherlode. No one has found it, at least no one who's come forward, but the legend remains alive. And as for Trabuco, before he died, he's said to have left just one clue behind, not a map, not coordinates, just a single sentence. The gold lies where the sun dies. Some say it refers to the west where the sun sets each day. Others believe it points to a specific mesa, one that glows bright red at dusk before fading to black. There are those who say it's a poetic riddle, and others think it's literal, meant to be deciphered like a code. Another version states that his final words were, "The gold is just a few miles from a New Mexico landmark," but whatever the truth is, 16 tons of gold worth over $1 billion are still unaccounted for, and somewhere in the desolate wilderness of New Mexico, a mystery is waiting to be solved, and where mystery lies, adventure awaits.